I was born in Boston on December 18th, 1946, 1 year after the end of World War II. Being the fourth child, I was simply the new baby for the first 3 months until I was given a name, Norman Charles. My father and mother were both born in the USA from Eastern European and German Jewish origins. I only knew my maternal grandparents as Dave and Jeanette. Dave, forever young and theatrical, still holds the world's record for the 35-yard dash, 4 2/5 seconds, run in 1896. The race was discontinued the next year. He was also once offered a job as a vaudeville performer in Las Vegas. Jeanette was from Rock Island, Illinois. She was Midwest Jewish aristocracy and went to Wellesley College in 1905, quite an achievement. All my relatives, except my eccentric California Aunt Polly, Uncle Norman, and her sons Richard Daniel and Daniel Richard, lived within 5 miles of us. My Uncle Norman and my Uncle Mark both fought in the Spanish Civil War. Their commitment and dedication made a big impression on me. We lived on 61 Arlington Road in a large brick house with a big yard in the suburban Chestnut Hill section of Brookline. We played baseball on the street. There were at least 20 of us baby boomers to make teams with. Dad, David E. Alper, was a food broker. He started out selling rice and flour in sacks with his father Morris, a serial entrepreneur, in the 50s as supermarkets were just coming in. Dad built up the brokerage business tremendously and had 100 employees. Brother Fred took the business in the 70s up to 300 employees. One time, Dad was bringing an exec from the Bumblebee Tuna Company home for dinner. I was told, "The Bumblebee man is coming." I expected him to have antennae. Dad was at work, but always came home whistling a tune and initiating lively dinner conversation, quite often political and social, and always thought-provoking. Ma, Marjorie Abrams Alper, was artistic and a fantastic cook. She was sometimes a little absent, but had a good sense of humor, and if she liked you, she loved you. If she didn't, she could be combative, as in the case of her relations with our warm-hearted live-in maid, Florence. In her own way, though, she tried her best. I was one of 4. Judy, 11 years older, was my first babysitter. She left the house when I was only 7. Fred, 8 years older. Dan, 5 years older. Football games on the front yard. Fred and Dan against me. These games defined our relationship and my resolve. Grit your teeth. Tough it out. Never give in. I was nicknamed the Bomber. It stuck. I went to the Edith C. Baker School for kindergarten through 8th grade. It was 95% Jewish, as was our neighborhood. I ran track under the torture of my brother Dan. I was very fast. I also played on our 3-times town championship baseball team. I played second base and almost always got on base by means of cheap hits and walks because of my size. My greatest joy from age 5 on was ice hockey, played on a very large frozen pond down the street from Cousin Donnie, who lived 1 street over in Newton. We played from sunup to sundown, eating frozen bologna sandwiches at midday. From the age of 10, I always worked. I took people's heavy steel trash barrels out to the street and then put them back for 25 cents a week, eventually raised to 35 cents a week. Neighbor Esther Sugarman complained at the increase, and I responded, "It's because of the cost of living." She asked me what that had to do with me. I said, I'm living, ain't I? I ran a lemonade stand from still snow on the ground until off to sports-only summer camps, which I liked but did not love. I enjoyed working and making money. I even sold collected Halloween candy to the neighborhood gardeners the day after. We belonged to Temple Israel, a cathedral of suburban Judaism. We went to temple only twice a year and witnessed the parade of the mink stoles. I went to Hebrew school, attended and despised by all. My bar mitzvah party was in a tent in our backyard. The highlight? Looking around for drop change afterwards. I spent a lot of this time with Cousin Jimmy, feasting on wonderful Aunt Susie's chicken after Sunday school. They lived in an apartment in the more urban part of Brookline, which was a lot more rough and tumble than Chestnut Hill. Snow basketballs were rolled in pebbles and thrown off the rooftops at approaching cars. We hit one once and ran like hell. Puberty came and was all-encompassing. I began Brookline High School in 1960. I hitchhiked to school 5 miles away with childhood friend Jeffrey Sherman. We knocked on car doors for rides down Route 9. I played freshman hockey, mostly on the bench, and varsity golf. I followed Brother Dan's footsteps, becoming a marshal and also the treasurer of my class. I was somewhat popular and had a girlfriend. We snuck down to New York once, but most often we either went to the movies, out to eat, and/or made out, including the day President Kennedy was shot. I had 2 sets of friends, the high-achieving types and the auto shop guys. Drinking parties were held most every weekend, often in our basement while my parents were away selling houses on the Cape. Once we got caught. Oy! My best friends were George Silverman and Mark Altman. We had a lot of wild adventures on the Cape and at our house on Herring Pond in the Cedarville section of South Plymouth, which was acquired by my father when I was 15. It was family property originally owned by Ma's uncle and aunt, and a place I have visited almost every summer since. I always had part-time jobs in high school, first at my brother-in-law Marshall's bookstore, and eventually at the IGA grocery store near Baker School. The owners, Saul and Sid, made sure I didn't waste a second. They couldn't afford for me to be idle. One of my jobs was driving the trash trailer to the dump. When asked if it was full, I said, yes. Have you stomped it? Have I what? Yes. Get in and jump up and down inside it. We pay by the load. Indeed, I found 1/3 more room by stomping. Senior year, I went to New York with a friend, Jay Beard, and fell in love with the city. I loved the pace and the action. I was rejected by Columbia University, my first choice. I was upset, but went to New York University in the University Heights section of the Bronx. It was a gritty neighborhood, pretty campus, academically challenging, and many motivated New York Jewish kids, but not much social life. Most of the students went home on the weekends. After one semester, I moved into a 1-bedroom, 5-story walk-up apartment with a roommate, and eventually 2 more. The total rent, $59 a month. I went on a handful of dates, but lots of lonely moments were spent at the ultra-depressing Atkinson's Tavern, drinking 15-cent beers, poured by Teddy the bartender. I was active tutoring local Puerto Rican kids, delivering for Chicken Delight, and working at Louis' Superette, who encouraged me to romance with the broom. I was also a busboy and a waiter at the faculty club with my friend Tim Volum. On my first day as a waiter, I was so nervous, I spilled roast beef gravy all over the dean's expensive tweed jacket. James, the boy is spilling gravy all over your sleeve. The dean was nice and handed me a towel. On another job, working a big party, only 3 out of us 5 waiters showed up. We were asked to just carry on. I organized the others and insisted, having become a New York waiter, that we weren't working the room unless we were compensated accordingly. Management reluctantly agreed. Dad had taught me about workers' rights and how to get them. At NYU, I also played club ice hockey in New Jersey in the middle of the night and was on the golf team. During the summer, after my junior year, I went cross-country in my mother's Buick convertible with my good friend George. We had agricultural jobs along the way that Dad had arranged. In Le Sueur, Minnesota, at the Green Giant plant, I was assigned to get inside an enclosed pea vat with goggles, a rubber suit, and a metal brush and a high-powered soap gun, flashlight around the neck to clean it out. Good thing I could fit. By senior year, I was very involved with the anti-war movement. I was very unhappy at NYU and had to get out of the Bronx. I transferred to the University of Wisconsin on the advice of old friend Jeffrey, with only 1 semester at NYU to go. This would extend my college career and, by the way, delay an Army call-up, as UW mandated additional requirements to graduate. I went to a famous demonstration on the steps of the Pentagon and burnt my draft card. I also signed a published statement that I would not serve in the Army under any circumstances, risking arrest. After transferring to the UW, which I loved, I worked part-time as a delivery boy at Badger Liquors and at Ella's Delicatessen, which was the headquarters for the campus SDS. Eventually, I was a checker cab driver. I loved that job, but helped to organize the drivers for better working conditions. I got fired twice for union activities, but won back my job in court along with back wages. I took all my union bros out to a fancy meal. The company is now a workers' co-op. Madison at that time had a highly tumultuous anti-war atmosphere. There were many protests and demonstrations, which escalated in intensity. At its height, there were campus-wide strikes. The National Guard was called in with tanks and tear gas to keep the school open. Students threw rocks at police cars and shouted, "Off the pig." Once we were under the campus in the storm tunnels doing reconnaissance work to investigate cutting the campus phone lines. Afterwards, we poked our heads out of a manhole cover and there was a 6'3" soldier with a bayonet standing right there. We quietly went back down and tried a different manhole to get out of the tunnel. Another time, in between classes, Bascom Hill became a mock cemetery to represent the Vietnam War dead. Our lives were on the line too. It was a dramatic and very scary time. I was head of the Economics Students' Anti-War Organizing Committee. Up against the wall, motherfucker. No class today, no ruling class tomorrow. We were going to end the war and transform the world into a utopian paradise. Lots of cannabis and psychedelics fueled the movement. Also lots of travel and splitting for the coast in my little VW. Most of my UW friends were Midwesterners who were very friendly and not Jewish. Different than any I ever had. They weren't nervous. One exception was Richard Stuchiner, a New York Jewish economics student who became unwittingly a Zionist seed for me. Towards the last months of school, the frenetic atmosphere in Madison spiraled out of control inside me. I became disjointed and increasingly divorced from reality, resulting in a nervous breakdown and a 9-month stay at the McLean Psychiatric Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. I was given my BA degree in absentia. Upon being escorted home from Wisconsin by my parents, I was seen by my father's golfing buddy and geriatric psychiatrist, Marty Berezin. He felt I was a threat to myself or others. It didn't help that I tore off my clothes in his office, yelling, "Don't you understand, Marty, that we're all animals inside?" while scratching myself like an ape. That landed me in Bowditch Hall, or the ditch as we called it, which was the maximum security ward at McLean's. After 800 milligrams of Thorazine per day for 10 days, I was brought down hard, like wearing lead overshoes. Eventually, I was transferred to a less secure ward and spent the next 9 months mostly on the grounds. Occasionally, after 6 months, I was allowed to go home to my parents' decorator-infused penthouse for a visit. It was a tough time, but I dreamed that I would get out and flourish. Was it inner fortitude? Was it resolve? The bomber would break through the line? I was released at the age of 23. A much later expose revealed that full-pay patients were left to bake substantially longer than others. I needed the help, but not for 9 months. After McLean's, I was still shaky. I lived in my parents' place and worked in Marshall's book warehouse. Eventually, I got stronger, found roommates, and moved into a rundown tenement apartment in Inman Square, Cambridge, with spilt beer and piss in the entranceway every weekend. I actually felt more comfortable there than I did at my parents' place. There were shades of Madison, but now I was out of school and on my own. I got a clerk job at Marshall's bookstore in Harvard Square, and while working at the store, I saw a personal ad in the local alternative newspaper. F-23 Sagittarius seeks ride to the West Coast. It was a dream of mine during McLean's to split for the coast with a female in a camper van. Now was my chance. Eventually, after a meeting at the store, which was pleasant enough, Linda Buckner, F-23, from Malden, Mass., moved in with me at the tenement apartment, and in the summer of 1971, we traveled cross-country together for 9 weeks. It was a fun odyssey, and upon our return, I started the Alper Wooden Bowl Company, my first business, with Linda and another roommate helping me. We were selling rough-hewn salad bowls from Vermont outside of the Harvard Square store on the sidewalk. Business was brisk, as everything was natural in those days. I went to Vermont once a month in my van to pick up more bowls and developed a wholesale as well as a retail business, slowly picking up complementary items. Eventually, Linda and I moved into a nice ground floor flat close to the Charles River in Watertown. I moved the retail bowl business to the front stoop of Marshall's Brookline Booksmith in Coolidge Corner. It had more room to display my increased product assortment. One time, my mother stopped by to visit, with all my wares spread out all over the sidewalk. An old Brookline High School friend of hers, Harold, came by and said, "Marge, can you believe what's happened to Coolidge Corner?" pointing to me and my woodenware with a smirk. "Harold," she said, "that's my son Norman." Without missing a beat, he said, "Oh, it's so colorful. It looks like Calcutta," and walked away. It got kind of cold sitting out there in the winter, and I was tired of it. Linda was very interested in natural foods, so together, in the summer of 1972, we decided to open up a real store called Bread and Circus. Our tagline, food, functionals, and fun. down the street from the Booksmith on Harvard Street. We sold artisan housewares, natural foods, and lots of other natural items, including wooden toys and plants. I continued to operate the wholesale woodenware business from the basement and expanded the line to include wooden utensils, cutting boards, and more. Natural foods, artisan housewares, and natural lifestyles were just beginning to take hold. Brands like Celestial Seasonings tea and Haagen-Dazs ice cream were new and exciting. We were true pioneers. In the winter, we would wait to pick up fresh organic produce from a container from California at Logan Airport at 5:30 in the morning. We partnered with 5 other little natural food stores to help fill up one container. Although not a gold mine and still early into the natural foods craze, the store continued to grow and we rented the adjacent storefront. In September 1973, we got married in the backyard of Linda's parents' house. We operated the store and the wholesale business until the summer of 1975. The confinement of being in that store together and then at home 24/7 got to both of us, and we sold the store to Anthony Harnett for $10,000, paid out over 3 years. I vowed never to go into the retail business again as long as I lived. Although a ma and pa, the store gave Tony a great base from which to build the largest natural food supermarket chain in New England and eventually to sell the business to Whole Foods Market. After our sale, Linda and I went to Europe on $5 a day and returned to join the Back to the Land movement. We moved to our family house on Herring Pond. We lived in the big house during the winter and in the boathouse during the summer when my parents came back north from Florida. From this remote Cedarville location, we greatly expanded the wholesale woodenware business. We started to import from Thailand, Spain, Haiti, and Portugal, and developed a nationwide wholesale business. Alper Wooden Bowl Company became Alper Woodenware Company. On February 2nd, 1977, another creation, our sweet and sensitive son, Jesse Oakes Buckner Alper, was born. A thrilling and overwhelming development. But underlying incompatibilities, recognized but not resolved, resulted in our divorce a year later. Linda left the business and moved further out onto the Cape. I would see Jesse on weekends and for extended times in the summer. A tough, bittersweet existence, especially as Herring Pond was poorly insulated, and in the winter, winds blowing off the water would go right through the cottage walls. The locals, what few there were in the winter, were little more than employees or acquaintances. I did have 2 friends. One was old Swedish Mr. Broman, who made spice racks for us and was a surrogate father figure after my dad died. His memorable line, "Sometimes you got to eat your own shit," has been proved to be true many times in my life. My other dear friend was David Buckman. He and his wife Frimma adopted me after I was once again single, and we would often grill, believe it or not, pork chops together at their house in Plymouth. Eventually, I moved to a winter rental in Hyannis, overlooking the ocean and directly on the beach. Although only slightly more alive than Herring Pond, the ocean was my constant and beloved companion. My weekends with 2.5-year-old Jesse, although solitary and difficult, were rich with connection and closeness. Once, when the 2 of us went out to dinner for my birthday, I ordered a cake. The waitress asked how old he was, pointing to Jesse. 34, I said to her astonishment. It was lonely out on Cape Cod in December. Alper Woodenware Company continued to grow and thrive as I put all my energy into it. I moved the business from Cedarville to an industrial park in North Plymouth, and in 1980 changed the name of the company again to Alper International Incorporated to reflect the inclusion of yet more rustic housewares such as artisan-made glassware and rustic enamelware. The name also made us sound bigger than we were, something that at 5'4.5" I knew about quite well. In 1980, I decided to rebrand myself, Alper for the 80s. I had had it with Cedarville and Cape Cod. I rented an apartment in Weymouth, a suburb of Boston. It was not me living in a cubicle, but it got me out of the wilderness and into civilization. I continued to expand Alper International and commuted down to North Plymouth when I wasn't traveling around the country attending trade shows or visiting sales reps and customers. In Weymouth, I began to come alive and even started to date women again. After 1 year in Weymouth, I bought my first house on 18 Eldridge Court in Hingham, a picturesque seaside suburb of Boston. It was rich in history and tradition, but with stiff and waspy people. My little house, which was built in the 1800s, however, was great. It was right on a tidal marsh that I would watch fill up and empty every 6 hours. And it was 2 blocks from Hingham Harbor, where my 13-foot Boston whaler was moored. Many an afternoon and weekend were spent on the boat, cruising up and back to Boston, and once even coming up all the way from the Cape Cod Canal in this little tiny boat. After 3.5 years in Hingham, I decided that Alper International needed to either get sold or get bigger. It needed to get more primary, i.e., owning factories instead of buying from them, as our costs were going up and we were now entering the big leagues. The gourmet housewares industry, which is what it was called, previously full of little startups, was now consolidating and competition was stiffening. I was also increasingly tired of New England. After my annual sales trips to the sunny West Coast, I yearned to relocate and start a new life there. I decided to sell the house and the business, which by then had 10 employees and a bunch of commission-based sales reps. I really enjoyed the foreign buying trips, but after having sold woodenware for 13 years, I was ready for something new. In late summer 1984, I sold Alper International and the house and finally realized my 4-year-old dream of moving to Santa Cruz, California, 60 miles south of San Francisco. Santa Cruz is an idyllic beach town with a university, lots of singles, and a laid-back atmosphere. Before I left Hingham, though, I got stoned on the beach and decided that before I relocated to California, I was going to go to where? Israel? I don't know why I chose Israel as a much-needed vacation destination, except to think that I had channeled my Wisconsin roommate Richard Stuchner, who would exude his love for the country, along with romantic tales of its wide-open landscape and his grandfather's colorful business adventures in pre-state Palestine. At the time, I told him I was a citizen of the world. I had no interest in Israel or in anything Jewish, and didn't even know where the Hillel House was on the Madison campus, even though he was its president. But in the fall of 1984, I decided to go there before I drove myself west in my green VW Scirocco. That trip would change my life forever. On my first trip to Israel, I decided to enter as Moses did from Egypt. I flew to Cairo, saw the pyramids, the famous Egypt Museum, went on a Nile cruise, and after a week was ready to get the hell out of there. Cairo and most of Egypt was dirty, smelly, disorganized, and I didn't feel comfortable being there as a Jew. I was happy when the little 8-seat bus from Cairo to Tel Aviv crossed the Suez Canal, and even happier when I reached the desert border station in Israel. The sprinklers were on, the flowers were blooming, and the modular office was clean, orderly, and air-conditioned. In addition, the female interrogator was very attractive. I felt like I was home. I had never been there, but felt that this land was mine, a feeling I had never had in the United States. It was an emotional explosion, and my love of the country has only deepened over time. I met my sister in Jerusalem, and later on we explored Israel together. While at the Western Wall, a black-garbed, ultra-Orthodox guy strongly encouraged me to go to my yeshiva and listen to my Rebbe. I waved him off, but my sister, also a secular Jew, encouraged me to go. She said, "When you're in Madrid, you go to a bullfight, right? Well, you're in Jerusalem. You should go to a yeshiva." Why did she encourage me to go? Was it intuition? Was it divine inspiration? A random suggestion? Anyway, I couldn't argue the point, so I went to Esha Torah and heard Rabbi Noah Weinberg's shiur. It was on Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of the elders. He was funny, and the talk was fascinating. Afterwards, one of his cadre of young rabbis took me into the rubber room and had answers for my arrogant and ignorant questions. By now, the hook was firmly placed inside my mouth. I later learned that Rabbi Weinberg had sold ladies' handbags door to door in Brooklyn as a college kid. I imagine he was quite successful. He was very convincing, and in his deep New York accented voice, had affable lines such as, "You know the weekend that we all enjoy every 7 days? It was a Jewish product." No wonder Esha Torah has the biggest building in the old city. After touring the country and loving every minute of it, we returned to the USA. I got into my Scirocco and headed west. 4.5 days later, I was in the Golden State and off to a new life. But that trip to Israel stayed with me, and I became an ardent Zionist with more than a passing interest in Jewish history, philosophy, and ritual. Upon my arrival in Berkeley, I immediately went to Santa Cruz, my dream come true. 4 days later, I left and returned to Berkeley, where my brother and my cousin Rick were living. I didn't know anyone in Santa Cruz. I didn't have a job. I was shown one seaside hovel after the other to rent, and I was desperately lonely. So much for dreams. I moved into my cousin's basement and stayed there for a few months until I bought my first house in California on 920 Ventura in Albany, a small city adjacent to Berkeley. It was cute. It looked like New England, and I was moved by the fact that both from the roof of that house and from the roof of my house in Hingham, I could see the sea. From sea to shining sea, I had made it. I began to listen to cassette tapes of the 48 Ways to Wisdom, the package which Rabbi Weinberg had developed from the ancient Pirkei Avot. I would study one way a day while sitting in my newly installed hot tub, looking out at my bamboo-surrounded yard and my new lime tree. Ah, the California life. At this time, I was introduced to Rabbi Yehuda Ferris, the newly installed Chabad rabbi in Berkeley. He was patient, kind, and gentle. A Jewish missionary, but a spoon feeder, not a pusher. And quite a musician, by the way. I found myself often hanging out at Chabad and learning as much from his behavior and lifestyle as from his teachings. I spent many years learning from and emulating him. I owe him a big debt of gratitude. I realized through my studies that I needed to prioritize my life goals and take concrete steps to fulfill them. My first and most important goal was to find a life partner and create a second family. By January of 1985, I had indeed found that partner when I met Hope Michelle Feingold. We were introduced by sister-in-law Lynn's cousin Peter, who was Hope's housemate. But I believe it was beschert. It was meant to be. Although she told me she was an, quote, ordinary girl from Brooklyn, she was anything but that. Pretty, with blue-green eyes, gorgeous jet black long hair, self-contained, and with a great sense of humor. But more importantly, she cared about me, took charge of things, and was a real people person. She gave me a lot of rope, which I need. And I knew she would be a good mother. She had, like me, escaped the straitjacket of East Coast life and moved west to the Bay Area. The next summer, I returned to Israel with Jesse on a 1-month family living experience in Israel with the JNF. We lived by the sea in a little shabby Rosenblatt hotel in Nahariya. It was a tremendous experience. 8-year-old Jesse loved it, performing little skits imitating the group. He always loved acting, and we both got a taste of Israeli life while working to restore a park nearby. My mother joined us for her first trip to Israel, and we watched my sister Judy play tennis for the United States team in the Maccabiah Games, the Jewish Olympics. It was a thrilling spectacle. Hope came to Israel later on that summer, and we toured together with Jesse. After our return, Hope moved into my house in Albany, and in December 1985, I proposed. Thankfully, she accepted, and we set the wedding date for May 25th, 1986. We had our wedding ceremony at the Berkeley Marina, followed by a joyous party on the Hornblower Commodore, cruising glorious San Francisco Bay. We honeymooned in Tahiti. I had always wanted to go there after hearing those Polynesian drums during my summer in Hawaii as a 20-year-old operating a freight elevator at the Dole Pineapple Cannery. Tahiti was exotic and blissful until we wiped out on a motorbike and landed in a local clinic. But we had lots of great memories from this amazing time in our lives. Shortly before our wedding, we got a real surprise from Linda, now living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She announced that it was best that Jesse come to live with us. It was a big decision, but most of all for Hope. She knew it would be good for Jesse and me, but it would be a big commitment from her. Luckily, we worked it out, and Jesse came to live with us in September of 1986. The summer of 1986 was busy as we prepared the house for 9-year-old Jesse's arrival. We shopped around for schools for him, and after a lot of consideration, decided on Techia, the local Jewish community day school. My Jewish identity was deepening, and I wanted Jesse to have core Jewish knowledge and be in a supportive and warm atmosphere. Jesse would fly up to see his mother in her new home in Seattle once a month, and he had even memorized the flight instruction safety spiel down to the last word. He made friends at school and eventually acclimated to his new life. We also made many new lifelong friends with other parents at Techia. Shortly after his arrival, we moved out of our 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow in Albany to a much larger house at 597 San Luis Road in Berkeley. We had a downstairs unit, which we rented out to help cover the mortgage. Jesse's little brother, David Ron Alper, was on the way. Baby David, blonde as wheat straw, was born on September 4th, 1987. Jesse and David loved each other deeply. My interest in Israel grew into a passion. My sabbatical years were over and I needed to go to work. I conceived of a business that would support the new country to which I was so attached. In the months preceding David's birth, I started the Holy Land Gifts Company. Ronald Reagan was President of the United States, and in my research, I learned that 1 out of 3 Americans identified as born-again Christians. Why wouldn't the evangelical Christian community want to buy things from where he walked? I created a mail order catalog and went to Israel 6 times within 6 months to source handicrafts and special foods. I launched the business out of a Quonset hut at the Berkeley JCC, where Hope was the PR director. There was something ironic about selling Jesus videos and holy water from this Jewish headquarters. My nephew Michael helped me sometimes. One day I shouted, "Hey Mike, can you bring me a case of holy water?" And we both looked at each other and burst out laughing. In the course of developing the business, I talked to many Christian organizations. I assumed the name Norman Charles and created an address in El Cerrito to seem less radical than Berkeley. None of it felt comfortable, nor did the business succeed. As my older brother Fred said, "Is this a cause? Is this a crusade? Or is it a business?" I think it was really something between a cause and a crusade for me. And when I finally closed the business, I felt very deflated. My first business failure was a bitter pill to swallow. We Alpers are winners, not losers. In the winter of 1988, I explored other businesses to buy. Nothing seemed promising, and I needed to look for a real job. Robert Moses Alper, born November 14, 1989, was yet unconceived, but we knew we wanted another child, and I needed to make money. The thought was to find an entrepreneurial division of a big company. I was 42, and I was told by one recruiter that I was too old, too entrepreneurial, and that he had nothing for me. About this time, my brother Dan had been to the St. Viateur bagel shop in Montreal. He suggested that I open a similar store in Berkeley. Moi? I couldn't measure accurately, had no mechanical ability, had never baked anything, and wasn't at all sure about the early hours. But although it didn't have to do with Israel, it was Jewish, and when he suggested that I at least check it out, I did as told by my big brother. First stop, Murray Lender, co-founder of Lender's Bagels, which had grown from a ma and pa store in New Haven to a huge national frozen bagel purveyor. Dad was an old friend, and Murray generously shared his contacts. When I expressed concern about my lack of expertise, one of his equipment dealers told me of a woman in Pittsfield, Mass. Who, with no knowledge, had developed a very successful, award-winning bagel shop. Turns out, she was a former customer of mine at Alper International, the housewares business, and she had now opened a bagel shop next to her gourmet housewares store. Go figure. I went to see Sue's place and tried a bagel. Wow, it was fantastic. Sweet and salty, but just the right amount of each. Delicious. Through her, I bought the recipe and contracted expertise and ongoing consulting from her maven, Danny Kaplan of Cranston, Rhode Island, a fabulous guy. And so much for Norman Charles Alper. In the spring of 1988, at Shavuot time, I officially changed my name to Noah Chaim Alper, with the encouragement of Wisconsin friend Khalid Hakim, a.k.a. Charles Kerelick. Beyond shedding a name I always hated, I now had a Jewish-identified name, not a waspy one. Norman Charles did not fit me, and in retrospect, Noah's Bagels certainly made for a better brand name than Norman's Bagels. I spent a little over a year finding, designing, and building out a store. I worked closely with Danny Kaplan, learning the processes. I developed a logo, hired staff, figured out the menu, sourced ingredients, etc. The basic formula would be Danny's, but I was obsessive about every little detail of the operation. Retail is detail, my dad had always taught me. Besides the bagels, we also created a mini New York appetizing store, selling an extensive line of fabulous smoked fish, great pickles, and many flavors of house-made cream cheese schmears. I hunted down a great location on College Avenue in Berkeley, and on my mother's birthday, August 3rd, 1989, I opened the first Noah's New York bagel store. So much for never going into the retail business again. The response was immediate and overwhelming. After the demise of the Holy Land Gifts, the lightning success of Noah's astounded me and gave credence to my newfound faith. My newfound Jewishness also dictated that I not work on Shabbat. I did not deviate from that for 6.5 years while I was at Noah's. Although not fully observant, I enjoyed a leisurely Friday night Shabbat meal with my family and walked to my beloved newfound Jewish home, Congregation Beth Israel, on Shabbat day with the boys. These rituals really saved me and allowed me at least a little rest and time with my wife and my kids. A year after operations, Brother Dan made overtures of wanting to get involved in the business. I was tentative about it. Was I going to be the boss? Was he going to be the boss? But upon the insistence of my mother to let Danny into the business, we constructed a complicated deal whereby he and partner Bob Polsky would be licensees, but they would not work for me. He and Bob opened the second Noah's store in North Berkeley, roughly 2 years later, also with tremendous success. Eventually, Dan brought in a general manager. I concentrated on producing the bagels from our new commissary in Emeryville, and at the same time, our family moved to a craftsman home on 1068 Spruce Street. A lot of hard work with all hands on deck, but the business was succeeding way beyond my wildest dreams. After we had a handful of stores between us, we decided to merge our two entities together. And Dan's general manager, Bill Hewson, became CEO of the combined organization. I quit running the commissary, thank God, and instead became head of marketing, the face of the business, and the chair of the new board of directors. The business grew and grew and grew, and almost all of the new stores were successful. The business was growing too fast to finance it internally, so we brought in outside investors, a venture capital firm, and eventually even Starbucks as partners. We hired terrific seasoned professionals from whom I got my virtual MBA, as well as a great team of store managers, bagel schmearers, etc. It was really a team effort. We had a happy, supportive culture and did a lot to help the communities we served. At the end, we had 1,000 employees, 38 kosher stores, and we're the largest kosher retailer in the United States. We operated from Seattle to Los Angeles. Upon receiving an offer we couldn't refuse, however, in 1996, we decided as a collective to sell the business. Dan and I had complementary skill sets. I couldn't have done it without him, and vice versa. Highlights of the business were serving bagels to President Clinton, seeing Noah's bagels go into space, knowing that we ran the business ethically and that our employees and customers were treated well. Dan and I learned so much from our savvy and highly principled father. During the last few years at Noah's, I knew that my days in the business were numbered. I had always been a one-man band, and the business was getting too big, too impersonal. And though my role was increasingly ceremonial, what I really wanted was to go to Jerusalem with my family and learn at the Pardes Institute for Jewish Studies, a renowned pluralistic co-ed yeshiva. After selling Noah's, I worked for a year in a transitionary role for the acquiring company Einstein Brothers Bagels. I started taking Hebrew lessons and Jewish philosophy classes at Cal. In the fall of 1997, Hope, our two younger boys, and I moved to Jerusalem for an academic year, and it was one of the best years of our lives. For the first time since David and Robbie were born, I had plenty of time to be with them and to explore our new hometown, Jerusalem. It was, in a word, transformative. That fall, I became completely Shomer Shabbat. No driving, cooking, radio, phone, TV, etc. It felt natural in our largely religious neighborhood, and with the kids' school, Ephrata being a religious public school, we made a lot of friends who were other parents. I would attend yeshiva after walking the kids to their school along the way. Pardes was every bit as stimulating as I had imagined, but by December I had more questions than answers. I was told that's what Jewish learning is all about. I came to realize that Jewish pedagogy was entirely different than Western academia. There was a noisy Beit Midrash where texts were furiously argued over by pairs of students, not a quiet library. And there were no right or wrong answers. Everything was up for debate. Questioning and contemplating was the goal, not finding the correct answers. We enjoyed traveling around the country with the kids and had many, many adventures, such as stumbling upon a random couple's outdoor chuppah and being invited in for a pre-wedding dinner. We were in a foreign country that in many ways felt more like home than home. Hope kept herself busy with the kids and a bunch of volunteer jobs, and by the end of the year we had really settled in and even debated staying on for another year. I had gained a lot of knowledge, but felt I had only scratched the surface and was keenly aware of just how much there was yet to learn. The kids thrived, became fluent Hebrew speakers, and each acquired private bullies as well as very close friends. Israeli society was is direct, physical, sometimes rough, but always from the heart. We returned to Berkeley in the spring of 1998, having bought our dream home at 910 Oxford Street in the Berkeley Hills. It was built in 1912 and has great woodwork. It also has great bay views and a swimming pool. We are very, very blessed people, although not really conscious of it most of the time, unfortunately. Almost immediately upon arrival back in California, I was approached by a Nancy Peckner from a well-connected local Jewish food family to help start a Jewish community high school. She indicated and pointed out a missing piece of Jewish infrastructure in the Bay Area. Selfishly, I wanted my two younger sons to have that experience. Jesse was about to finish Brandeis University. I told her if we were going to do it, I was in. If we were going to just talk about it, I wasn't. Very shortly afterwards, we started talking to people and were introduced to Mem Bernstein, an extremely wealthy woman who was looking for an educational project in the Bay Area. We now had the resources to make this happen, and it was thrilling. Mem wasn't easy to please, and one of my main jobs as president of the board was simply to keep her happy at all costs. It was a rocky beginning. Very hard to find a head of school, very hard to find a location, as it was during the tech boom of the late 90s, and very hard to recruit students and teachers. It was also very hard for me to be subjected to endless discussions about educational philosophy, curriculum, admission policies, etc. I learned quickly that academic administration was very unlike business, and that I had to contend with a lot of process, not my forte. But Nancy and I were a good team. She led the board meetings, and together we made it happen. We, of course, also received valued support from a number of very committed community members, including Nancy's husband, Richie, my friend, and my favorite golf buddy. After a lot of fits and starts, we opened the Jewish Community High School of the Bay with a dedicated board and 22 students on September 1st, 2001, 10 days before 9/11. We were housed in a converted preschool space at Congregation Kol Shofar in Tiburon in Marin County. What a ride it had been. I spent the next couple of years on the board and was able to find a great replacement for myself as president, Dr. Brian Kay, who stewarded our move from the preschool space to a beautifully remodeled campus in San Francisco. JCHS was also a family affair. Hope was the co-chair of the parents' organization. Jesse started an amazing, award-winning organic vegetarian school lunch program, and Robbie was a star athlete in the 4th class. David was in the 1st class, and sitting on the stage for his graduation was one of the proudest and most exciting moments of my life, far eclipsing my satisfaction with the Noah's Bagel success. 20 years later, JCHS is still going strong with 575 graduates to date. After JCHS, I got interested in opening a kosher sit-down restaurant in the East Bay. It was another piece of critical Jewish infrastructure that was missing. I found a group of investors and we opened Ristorante Raphael in 2003 in downtown Berkeley. We had a great Italian chef named Domenico Testa. He was the real deal. He even figured out great Boston pizza and figured out also amazing, authentic, tasty pescatarian and vegetarian food that was also kosher. Hope did a wonderful job as the catering manager and brought the Raphael experience far and wide to weddings, luncheons, and other celebrations. We would go there every Sunday night to have a delicious meal with Hope's mom, Lil, who we had moved out from Florida. My grandfather, Dave Abrams, Zichron Levracha, a bit of a shicker, would have loved a little bar. We almost made money by our final year, but our lease renewal was up and there was just not enough promise to remain open. We closed to the dismay of our loyal customers and my own family. After Raphael, I feel there was a book inside me. I wanted to tell a triumph over adversity story, a triumph over adversity story, including the McLean's experience. It was also to be a Jewish pride story and a business memoir, highlighting doing good is good for business. Another factor was to get publicity for a business coaching and consulting business that I had started to develop. I hired Tom Fields Meyer, a professional writer from LA, to help me craft the book. He was very Jewishly identified and was easy to work with, a perfect fit. The self-published book, Business Mensch, Timeless Wisdom for Today's Entrepreneur, was completed at the end of 2008, the beginning of the Great Recession. The next year, I went on the road to promote it, sometimes to groups of out-of-work Jewish execs. My inspirational message was well received during this difficult time. Hope was amazing at lining up gigs for me, and I wound up giving my talk to over 50 organizations and selling 5,000 copies of the book. I am very glad to have written this memoir to share with everyone. Since then, I have kept busy advising young entrepreneurs and doing public speaking events and classes. I have worked with 147 clients as Noah Alper Consulting. Most of my clients are pro bono. I feel like my advice is appreciated, and I enjoy sharing lessons I've learned from experience. It also keeps my mental wheels turning. I am the member of 3 men's groups, a book club, a Torah study group, and a once-a-month martini get-together with 2 of my best friends, Dan Fingerman and Harry Pollack. I have a wonderful family. I've traveled the world, supported many Jewish causes. I fundraise for JCHS, our Jewish community, and my spiritual home, Congregation Beth Israel. I've also become an avid biker. I was fortunate enough to do 8 multi-day charity bike rides in Israel for Aline Hospital and Beit Halochem. Jesse, David, and Robbie each did one with me, and one with Hope, who was a volunteer. I'm still working on breaking 90 in golf, and in 2000, we bought an apartment in Jerusalem, which really feels like home. We've had many fantastic stays at Masrik 13, including joyous celebrations such as second bar mitzvahs for David and Robbie, and of course our legendary Sukkot parties out on our Merpeset. In 2021, in the middle of Corona-19, we bought a little house in White Plains, New York at 98 Holbrook Road, 8 doors away from David, Nama, and granddaughters Aviv and Gal. We plan to spend a chunk of the year there, not in winter. We also recently visited Jesse, Maya, and granddaughter Leah in their new home in amazingly beautiful Hararit in the Galil, and we hope to have many, many more visits with them there. Saba and Grandma are so lucky to now have 3 lovely, cute, and smart little granddaughters. We recently visited Robbie in his new home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and are patiently waiting to dance at his wedding someday. At age 75, as I look out at the ruby red sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge, I say to myself, what a wonderful, wonderful world. And as I used to say to our little boys in Jerusalem many years ago, thank Hashem for all your blessings.